Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another webinar here hosted by Affinity Management Services. We have the great pleasure of having two phenomenal guests with us today to talk about a very important topic, which is updating your association governing documents through e-voting. We will be touching up on other items that have to do related to e-voting because we have received several questions as participants started to register for the webinar. But we're very excited to be here. There's so much going on today in all types of associations, whether condos, HOAs. We're constantly in the media, and we're all about transparency here and providing our residents, our CAMs, our managers, and so forth the opportunity and understanding of how to get through these difficult times, and one of the ways is through electronic voting. And to add on top of that, we have so much legislation going on. Does it impact my association or not? Do I have Kaufman language? Do I need to make amendments to my documents, and so forth? So we're definitely going to touch up on those topics today. We do want to let everyone know the Q&A is available, so feel free to put in any questions there. Marnie, Frank, and myself will do our best to get to those questions. And just as an FYI, we will be only addressing questions that are specific to today's webinar. If you have other questions, I'm sure Frank, Marnie, or myself will make ourselves available to be able to address it if it's in our area of expertise. Also want to let everyone know that we will be sharing the video with both Get Quorum, Haber Law, and here at Affinity. We'll post it. So if one of your board members or CAMs missed it, they'll be able to get that. And lastly, before we kick it off, we will have a couple polls to make this interesting and interactive. So kindly participate, and that way we can provide some of the data to everyone that we have here. So love to get started with a couple introductions. So of course, ladies first. Marnie, you want to say something about yourself, about the firm that you represent?
Of course. Good morning. My name is Marnie Reagan. I'm with Haber Law. We're a full-service law firm presenting and providing services on all aspects of condominium and homeowners associations, soup to nuts kind of thing. We also do commercial real estate, some commercial litigation, and so forth. About myself, I'm a board-certified attorney in condominium law. I've been practicing for over 20 years. I sometimes wonder how I made it this long, but it's an intriguing practice. And it's certainly changed with the times, whether it be the market up and down, COVID. It's certainly been interesting. And electronic voting is something that I think is a great tool that we can use to really bring some of these older communities into this century, with their documents, with their process, and how they go forward. So I'm happy to be here this morning. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on, Marnie. I know we work very well with your firm, so it's a pleasure to have you on today. Frank?
Good morning, everyone. Hope you got your coffee, water, whatever it is, your tea this morning. Thank you, first and foremost, obviously, to Rafael and Marnie for giving me the opportunity to connect with everyone today. I do represent Get Quorum. We are an electronic voting provider, not only in the state of Florida, where I service the communities, but also all throughout North America, over 2,000 communities that we service for e-voting. As far as myself, a little bit of a background. I've been here for almost 4 years with Get Quorum, providing electronic voting, serve on my own board of directors, 450 unit HOA, and prior to this, did work in the management industry for a number of years in South Florida. So all in all, hoping to be your subject matter expert today and beyond. We're here to help.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you on, Frank. We appreciate you giving us the time today. I know you have a ton of knowledge to be able to provide to all of those that are here today. So as for myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management. Similar to Marnie, I'm almost going on 2 decades doing this. One of the reasons why I'm bald. But outside of that, really, we are a community association management company. Our proven process is really align, execute, deliver, which is aligning with the association's vision, helping you deliver on that. And we do that by providing guaranteed results. So enough about us. I think we're here to really learn a little bit more about association voting and also amending the governing documents. So I think it would be best to start off with you, Marnie. And I guess if you could give our listeners here today an understanding of why would an association need to consider amending the documents? I know that with HOAs, we have MRTA, and we have other reasons of why, you must do it. But if you could give, I guess, a 30,000 foot for both our condo and HOA viewers today of why they need to consider amending the documents.
Well, absolutely. I mean, pretty much all new development in Florida is going to be controlled by either a condominium or a homeowners association. Very few areas really still only have single family homes that are out on their own. What we see though is certainly there's a large portion of Florida that is having some aging to these structures, to these documents. I'm sure everybody hears about or sees, documents that talk about livestock and talk about pigs, and clearly that's not what we have really going on here. We also have the need with respect to the changing needs of an association, whether it be electronic scooters or bikes, things that just weren't really contemplated when documents were created. And so you're really looking at it from both the operations as well as your covenants and restrictions on what you really would want to change in order to get your documents susceptible to enforce what you really want to enforce, and not be, crazy commandos, but really have a framework that can allow your community to flourish. And because ultimately what you want is property values to go up. So it really makes sense to have your documents evolve with you. And everyone hears about Kaufman language, and what that really is it's a phrase that's within the documents that allows your declaration to travel with time with the statute. Some documents have it, some documents don't. So one way to move your documents forward is that simple one amendment, is just adding that language in there to allow your documents to change with the statute. Now, granted, that statutory controls, that's not going to be anything having to do with maybe specific covenants or restrictions in your documents. So there's two real ways to look at it. And so the question is to take a look at your documents, call counsel, you can always call me, and figure out what you really need, and look at it from the legal perspective as to what you need to operate, as well as the personal component of what your building, what your community really needs or is wanting to change, and put those two together, and that's where we get Frank involved.
Excellent. Yeah, and we've seen it. Especially from the HOA and condo side, as you've mentioned, there is also some language which is discriminating in certain individuals. They're very old documents, but it's important for board members and CAMs to be reviewing their documents and seeing what changes are important, and then also having a strategy on how you're going to pass some of these amendments, because maybe initially you do it the simpler ones, and then you work on to the more difficult ones later down the line. So Frank, I know you mentioned earlier before we started the webinar about how long electronic voting is. So for those that don't know, when did electronic voting start in Florida, and what are some of the benefits that you've seen thus far since then?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rafael, for the question. And look, folks, on this call today, 2015 is the year that the statutes passed allowing electronic voting for condo co-ops and HOAs in the state of Florida. That's almost a decade, okay? For those of us that say, yes, 2024, we're a year out, a decade. So as typical Floridians, we just kind of sat by the wayside. We were like, all right, that sounds good, but we're probably not going to need any of that anytime soon. And then something called COVID struck, and all of a sudden we were scrambling for ways to take care of obviously our governance-related voting meetings in a more efficient way. And fast forward, these statutes that were already passed, right, in 2015. And so as far as benefits go, they're endless right now. What we're seeing is a massive amount of participation. So I'll start there. Over 70%, above 70% in the 2,000 communities that we service. That's huge for obviously some folks like Haber Law that can write up these documents and amendments. They can only take the community so far. They need participation, right? They need the owners to vote. And that's where electronic voting comes in. So I do encourage these board members, managers on this call, get familiarized with what it is. Biggest benefit for sure is participation, and let us know we're speaking to these communities in a language that they want to be spoken in. Instead of a letter in the mail with some amendments and limited proxies, they obviously want to vote electronically. As far as the second big feature, I'll leave it off there. It's savings in, obviously postage and mailing. Most of these notices and letters can be sent out electronically to owners, whether it's a limited proxy or whether it is a ballot for an annual meeting. Obviously, that can be sent off electronically. Number one, they get to the owners. There's tracking capabilities beyond what you can ever find with a paper ballot or proxy put in a mailbox with snail mail. Number two, you can even find out if some of these are open on the back end, which is not a statutory requirement, but always nice to track those and even send out some reminder emails if need be. So tracking, participation, and cost savings. All in all, I'll wrap it up there with some of the features.
I'm glad you brought the cost savings, because I know our associations are always looking for ways to save, not just time, but also money. And the reality is, I don't know if you guys saw the recent alert that the post office is also increasing the postage going up to, I believe it was 73 or 75, don't hold me to the number, but I know it's somewhere around there. But more than anything else, I guess from giving a management perspective, one of the challenges that we see for those associations that still haven't implemented electronic voting is just the time that it's taking to get these packages out. And many times what ends up happening, even if we're doing it way earlier than the 14 days, technically it's 60 days, but the second package, if there is a valid election, it's taking much longer. And even though we're not waiting to the 14 days to send it out, you have residents assuming that, oh, well, they're mailing them out late for XYZ reason. The reality is that it really is snail mail nowadays. So it's become very challenging, and the cost for that is significantly more than what it used to be years ago. So that is one great way of being able to utilize electronic voting. Marnie, I wanted to get, I guess, from your experience, if an association is looking to change, amend their documents, and they're looking to go the route of electronic voting, what steps does an association need to do from a legal side to get that process kicked off the right way?
Of course. I mean, it's actually a fairly simple process. The board has to come together, adopt a corporate resolution that they're going to adopt electronic voting and electronic notice. Now, I will say, I'm going to separate the two of them just because there is a caveat that I just want to make sure everybody understands. Electronic voting is electronic voting. It's fantastic. Electronic notice is a cost saver. However, once an owner submits to electronic notice, their email address becomes an official record. And I just want to make that very clear because there are some communities that want to undertake the electronic voting, but they don't want the electronic notice because people want that privacy. So it's just something to consider and to take into account. But yes, there's a huge cost saving when you do it. So going back, the process would be that the board would pass the resolution, send out the consents, also send out an opt-out, meaning that if owners don't want to, or they can hold that, and at any time in the future, they can still opt out, even though they've already submitted their consent. So it's a very simple process. Once the board passes it, it goes out to the membership. The management company will hold on to all the information that they get, contact their online voting system, and then each owner will have to create their own account, login information. So there is some work to do by the owners once the board passes the resolution. So it's not just a done deal. However, once you have that login information, those owners will have it going forward, and it makes it a very easy process.
Excellent. Now I do know, you have certain associations that are maybe large in size, and getting a quorum is very difficult. And then you have where residents, let's say, do want the electronic voting because they want that transparency, they want to be heard. But unfortunately, let's say the board doesn't want to do it, because technically the board does have to pass the ability to be able to use electronic voting and pass a resolution. Hopefully they're contacting your firm to prepare that resolution. What can members do to be able to try to, get the board members to do that? Because we do have right now approximately about 20% of our listeners are residents. So, I know I've seen the activity of residents wanting their voice to be heard more. Is there anything that they can do to get the board to really implement this process?
Sure. I mean, obviously show up at board meetings, express your interest repeatedly. The board is elected, but they should be representing what the masses want for their community. While it's not a true democracy, a great way to not get reelected is to not listen to what your membership is asking you to do. Communities can also petition the board to consider a topic at the next board meeting. They don't necessarily have to take action on it, but again, that's another way for the membership to get in front of the board and express their interest and desire that they really want this. In the end, and I don't want to disenchant my board members that are on the call, at a certain point, if the boards aren't listening, vote at your next election, change up the board, and have them, have your new board be responsive to what the members are wanting. Electronic voting is a great way to get your membership and your community engaged, whether they be living out of town, out of country. Mail is slow, and especially when you get around the holidays, it's even slower. So, it's not just about elections and controlling the board. It's more about, if you're wanting to do something with your documents, you have to have participation. That's always the biggest problem in these communities, is just getting people to participate. So if you have this electronic option, it's a lot more accessible, and you can get to those numbers. You have a 700 unit condo, and I went to a meeting last week, and all of a sudden, they had 400 votes electronically. They were able to paint the exterior of the building a new color. So it really matters. It's not just about elections and control. it's really about having your community be reactive and a board be reactive to really move the community forward. So that's where it can be very helpful.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, from the quick poll that we did, we had only 25% that do have electronic voting, and 70% don't. And out of that, 35% said they are considering it. I know, COVID with its challenges and what it did for our industry, there were very difficult times for all of us. But if there's one thing that it did do, which is accelerate the technology, but it still hasn't really caught up to where everywhere else is. But if you're a resident and you want to make those kind of changes, going back to that question, the way that I've seen is exactly what Marnie mentioned, which is really activating your residents. And I take things, at least here at Affinity, we try to take things in a very positive fashion. And many times people want to go with slander and this and that approach. Simple things is just bringing your residents together, hosting a wine and cheese at your home or in the park, whatever it may be, that really helps you in activating your residents and taking things in the approach of, look, we want more transparency within the community. And with everything that you're seeing in the news, that's an easy and quick way to accelerate it. So, Frank, I want to bring you back into the conversation and go into really the process of electronic voting, I guess, from your side. So from the legal side, Marnie gave us her input. What do you see from your side? What have been some of the challenges? Because there's always challenges in implementing a new process. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add to what Marnie said earlier about email address becoming official record of the association, I heard really good advice at one point, and it was from association counsel saying, hey, if you feel queasy about that, create a Gmail or an email account specifically to your association, right? Mine is, secretary, imagination farms, HOA@gmail.com, whatever it may be that you feel most comfortable with. And obviously it won't be your personal email.
Which is a great point, because Almi had that question. Can residents open an email just for association matters?
Encouraged, unless Marty feels otherwise, encouraged.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So open one up, and then obviously you won't feel so queasy. By the way, most people's emails addresses are out there in Google if you just Google it. But either way, I think that's a good point. In terms of challenges, Rafael, to answer your question, it would probably be with the folks that do not have an email address. And I know we've got about almost 100 folks on this call that obviously have email addresses. There are still people in the state of Florida that do not have an email address. Maybe are still working with a flip phone out there. And there's going to be some attrition in these communities of owners that do not or cannot participate electronically speaking in any of these processes because of the lack of technology on their end, not because obviously we're not able to service them. So certainly keep that into account as one of the challenges. And what we have found, it's about 30% year one. So across 2,000 communities that we service, 70% opt-in, consent, use the platforms of electronic voting year one, about 30%. So be open-minded, come into these situations understanding that about 30% of your owners are going to require still some sort of paper-based notice, paper-based ballot or proxy, depending on what you're attempting to do in your community. And obviously take that into account and have a plan in place for those processes. Good news, 70% of the owners opt in and consent, right? Major goals. So back to that original kind of comment that you were making earlier, how do homeowners get boards to really participate in electronic voting? Bring them the facts, right? And to Rafael's point, stop the slandering on the chats, get off of the neighbors app and the slandering. That's not going to help. Let's go with facts and not feelings, and giving board members ammunition that they need. Hey, listen, 70% of the owners opt in year one, right? Electronically speaking, there's what are our current participation rates, board members, right? Challenge them, ask them questions. What do they look like? How many owners show up at these meetings and actually vote? It's probably going to be 20 to 30%. With those facts alone, most board members will hopefully come to their senses. As far as another thing to keep into account and challenges with electronic voting, implementing the process. Look, it can be challenging. The resolution is a no-brainer, super easy. Get that out of the way, as Marnie says, and these statutes are obviously very clear, whether it's your 718.128 or 720.317, look those statutes up. Resolution simple. However, the next step could be challenging. It's getting owners to consent and opt into electronic voting. Keep that in mind. Partner up with an electronic voting provider, whoever that is, that's going to assist you and guide you every single step of the ways, and is not only going to provide you electronic voting software and kind of give you the 500-page manual for you guys to go at it, but actually supports you in implementing electronic voting. And that does start with making sure that you've got a good consent process in place to get owners opted in, because that is the second step after the resolution that Marnie mentioned there, making sure that owners opt in by default. For the owners that take no action, they stay opted out. Just to be clear, they do nothing, they stay opted out of electronic voting. However, again, those 70% or so year one, 80% year two are going to need to take obviously action and opt into electronic voting. And if you go with a paper-based consent form, we're finding very low return rates. So that could be a challenge as well. Find an electronic-based consent form that does have an electronic signature option and get those owners opted in, get that participation going. That really is the first step in electronic voting. After that, again, hopefully you can support the rest of the steps going forward.
Yeah, and it's great that you bring that up. I want to confirm with you, Marnie, that I know the HOA reform bill, HB 1203, was approved by the governor recently, and I know for HOAs, it now allows for electronic consent form. Is that correct?
Yes, which is true. And I saw real quick in the chat, yes, we do have to do a 14-day notice. It has to be mailed. One of the other questions, we don't have to amend your documents to allow for electronic voting. That's one of those provisions of the statute that's going to control no matter what. So you always have that option. You don't need the amendment.
Excellent, great points. And from your experience when it comes to those resolutions, is it a difficult process, Marnie, or it's just a pretty simple resolution that you set together?
It's very straightforward. The only thing that I do that's maybe a little bit different is I separate out the electronic voting from the electronic notice, allow the owners to opt in for both.
Okay.
And again, the electronic notice is what makes your email address an official record. So that way you provide the option to the owners, and they can always try and just do electronic voting if they don't want it. But again, you want them to do the electronic notice as well as the voting, because that allows you to have your cost savings. But it's just a matter of making sure your members know before they get in there that that's the one caveat to it.
Makes total sense. And I have a question here for you, Marnie, from Karen Shepard. She asks, if you include Kaufman language in your updated doc, does that mean you don't need to constantly get 67 approval every time to match Florida Statute 720?
Once you have that language, the provisions of the statute are going to control. What I would typically do is, some associations want to just add the Kaufman language. Others want to do it piece by piece, and that's an association decision on their own. But once you have that language, your document will travel with the statute, so you wouldn't have to go out and get that amendment all the time. Typically, what I will suggest to an association is add that provision, that potential amendment. I don't want to say it's a no-brainer, but it's a very straightforward, simple amendment. What I also do is couple it with an amendment to your amendment provision, because a lot of these older documents have 67, 70% in these very difficult, not necessarily supermajority, but a very difficult threshold in order to pass amendments. While you don't want your amendments to be passed by 10% of your membership, you do need a more palatable number. So sometimes you can mix in maybe a Kaufman amendment or a variation together with an amendment to that amendment provision, which gives you a little bit more flexibility going forward.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I had mentioned earlier, sometimes you get board members that, want to do the right thing and they just let's do everything all in one sweep. And unfortunately, that's not the way that it works. Sometimes it's best to either break down certain amendments. Okay, these are easier approved, get those done, start getting your numbers up, get that data then, and then start going into the more difficult ones, and some being allowing or not allowing renters, it's a big change to documents. So I wouldn't say, we're going to mix it all in, it's all or none. You have to have a strategy to it. And I guess from the management perspective, I know when we've been able to those associations that really wanted to adopt electronic voting, we can go through a survey initially. So in a survey, look, we're sending a survey to see how residents feel. Let's capture emails. We could send a simple notice. Let's start capturing those emails that we're missing and just mailing notices to those that we're missing emails for, so that we're keeping costs low and we're capturing the data that's necessary. So that's why it's important to making sure you're aligning yourself with the right partners, so that there's a strategy or a plan in place to say, okay, if this is the objective, let's work it backwards, so that we can get to that objective, or put a plan together. Because last thing you want is, hey, it's October, let's set up electronic voting. Well, it is pretty quick to do. You don't want to do that at the last minute, because then it gets sloppy. Then residents feel they lose the sense of, okay, is this really transparent? This is a bit ugly and messy. So, that's why we're having this webinar earlier in the year, when most associations have their annual budget meetings later in the year. So Frank, I want to bring you back in, speaking about that with regards to, adoption. You mentioned a couple times that you're seeing the numbers go up. What strategies can CAMs or board members do to start increasing those numbers so that, every year they're getting the participation that's necessary?
Yeah, definitely. I think you just mentioned certainly the number one strategy there, which is you took the words right out of my mouth. Start with engagement internally, some organic engagement through surveys, right? Make sure your residents know, hey, your voice counts, you're being heard. Martin mentioned great reasons earlier why they might adopt some amendments. And guess what? Pickleball courts might be one of them, right? Do you want to see pickleball courts? Do you want to see a dog park here in the community? Obviously. So just get engagement, make sure that they know that their voice is being heard. And then as you get to the steps of electronic voting, don't be shy to really make sure that there's communication around it. Hey, listen, the board of directors is certainly obviously taking a look at electronic voting as a whole and making sure we're vetting the process and the vendors that are best fit our community and our needs and our processes. So let the homeowners know, involve them. Obviously, when it comes to finding out that the resolution has passed, make a big announcement. We've passed a resolution. We're allowing electronic voting in the community. Put it on your poster board. Put it in the front of the community. There's going to be a consent process or opting in coming up soon, right? Don't be shy to spread the word and let owners know that this is an all-inclusive thing. It's not exclusive whatsoever. And then as owners start opting in, you're always going to have that FOMO, Rafael and Marnie. You know how that goes, right? Well, you're opted into electronic voting. You're getting noticed electronically. You can do it from your phone in the middle of the ocean on your Norwegian Cruise Line cruise ship or whatever cruise line you're in. I can't believe that you voted, from your vacation. So I went to the mailbox and grabbed my piece of paper and hoped that it made it back. So make it an exciting process, and as it should be. And then, of course, be relentless is kind of my last takeaway there for everyone on this call. Make sure that you don't give up the first round just because they didn't opt in or consent. Have some sort of automation around. Connect with an electronic voting provider that's going to make your life easy from a management perspective and board perspective, and have some sort of cadence around reminder emails. Hey, listen, we noticed you haven't consented or opted in to electronic voting. Contact management office if there's a bad reason why or some ill will that you have towards electronic voting. But for the most part, here's a reminder, and here's your link once again. We're again trying to be super inclusive and allowing you to opt in. We have found, to your point, Rafael, like, hey, what can communities do? We found that the first email for electronic opt-in usually isn't the one that gets clicked on and taken care of. It's usually the third or fourth, right? As again, typical Floridians, we got a lot going on out there. There's too much, honestly. And so by that third or fourth nudge, we realized, hey, we probably should do this. This isn't a bad idea. And neighbors start talking to other neighbors. So be inclusive, plenty of announcements to get excitement around it. And then, of course, send out reminder emails. Make sure that you do have some sort of reminder cadence that works for you, whether that's weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever that cadence looks like. And I have no doubt, at least from what I've seen over the course of the past 4 years, that you'll get 70% participation year one.
Excellent points, Frank. Appreciate that. And Marnie, I know we have about 70% of our audience here is condos. And are there any ways that communities can ease like the limits of, borrowing to fund special assessments, especially in light of the new statutory requirements, either using electronic voting? What can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that I was actually thinking about as Frank was speaking. It's not all about elections and amendments to the documents that relate to, violations and such. But in today's world, especially with all of the new laws, the new obligations, boards need more flexibility. And if you have old documents that are limiting your ability to borrow, limiting your ability to specially assess, you don't want to make it a free for all, but again, make it a palatable number. Borrowing under a certain amount can be this, borrowing over a certain amount is, say, a majority of a quorum. Make those numbers achievable so that when you do invoke your membership, you can get that response back so you can move forward. Because you don't want to have a situation where you have a number in your documents that you have to achieve it with a vote that's so far out of realm, you're not going to get it. You have to go to council and say, what do we do if we don't get it? Because obviously the work of the association doesn't stop. It is compulsory. So you don't want to have to take that road. You want to have your documents be reflective and flexible with the board and what needs to be done. So, what I see really being very achievable votes with electronic voting is borrowing those threshold special assessments, as well as material alterations. 75% if you don't have anything in your documents. Some don't, and then some documents where it comes back and it's, as otherwise stated in your documents, it's still a number that's high. So you can amend those types of provisions and create a bit more flexibility. Certainly your board is preparing specifications and different parameters on how they're going to address those items, but it gives the entity of the association a lot more operating capability. And so that's something that I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, I would agree with you there 100%, because there, as you stated, not all documents do have that, limits for borrowing, but many do. And that can be very challenging, especially when you have, fixed income communities, which, we completely understand those situations. But when you have to paint a building, you have to do a roof, or now with everything that's going on with SERS, being able to have those capabilities does make the lives of board members much easier. So Frank, in your experience, where have you seen, where have the numbers gone up? I don't know if you have any data. We do have a question here from Jean that asked, what are the potential cost savings? I don't know if you guys have tracked that kind of data to provide to our listeners.
Yeah, definitely. So look, in our world, we've gotten above 90% of that 70% to opt into electronic consent forms as well, in addition to electronic voting, right? When you kind of attribute that 60 to 70% opt-in and participation in electronic notices, you're going to have that much cost reduction in printing and postage, assuming, of course, that all of those owners are currently receiving paper notices. I know there's some exceptions out there. And so you can basically attribute, if all 70% or so of the owners opt into electronic voting and notices, which we do see a very close number in both of those opt-ins, then you can attribute that to the cost savings on the back end for printing and postage throughout the year. And to your point earlier, Rafael, when you've got an association with a ton of to-do lists, amendments in 1 year, right? Like most of the associations, even the HOAs, have the budget notice and obviously the 1 annual meeting notice, or potentially 2 annual meeting notices, depending on your procedures. When you add to that, special meetings, obviously, right? Amendments throughout the year, you name it, special assessment coming up, whatever is going on, roofing project I've seen. Those are all notices as well that are going to go out there. And let me let everybody in the audience know right now, we have taken care of amendments to the documents, which mandated for a copy of basically the changes that were going to be done. Sometimes they got into the 30 and 40 page range, right? You had to attach those documents as part of the notice. Well, guess what? That's a lot of printing, a lot of postage out there we've seen. So the more you have on your to-do list as a community, as far as these tasks to take care of in the future, obviously the more cost savings you're going to have. If you're just going to have 1 annual meeting, then you can expect to just see savings on budget, and then your annual meeting notices with the direct reduction of the owners that participate and opt in, basically. And this kind of leads me to obviously a point that came to my mind as we were all having discussions here in the last few seconds, which is, you mentioned the board earlier that maybe kind of split 50-50 and hasn't quite gotten to the point of passing the resolution. Let me give you an example, and again, just came fresh to my mind, of when this resolution passed in communities, even with that challenge. It passed when they needed a special assessment or project or an amendment to the documents. You know why? The board members went to council and they said, how do we take care of this? Because we've got no choice. We've got to take care of this. And council obviously smartly said, there's a tool out there. It's called electronic voting. It's going to get you the participation. 100% participation from the board members, right? Let's do this then, right? So all of a sudden, everybody agrees when you have some sort of stickling point there to take care of. But generally speaking, massive cost reductions, and again, a ton of efficiency. Let's not just focus on cost reduction. That's all nice. Believe me, again, I serve on a board. Some of these decisions are unfortunately only based on how is it going to help us, cost-wise. Let's walk through the features there and make sure we're keeping the benefits in mind, which include obviously efficiencies, which include getting things done like these special assessments, you name it, amendments, right? Dare I say material alteration votes. We've done those for pool areas in condominiums that otherwise would never have been done without electronic voting. What's the value in something like that, right? So when you keep that in mind, it's an endless and infinite amount of value in that sense.
Yeah, that's correct.
I was
Go
just
ahead,
going to
Mike.
add in real quick, one issue you have in a traditional, condominium, if you don't have electronic voting, is you call your membership meeting, and if you don't have the vote necessary, you have a limited proxy. That limited proxy lives for 90 days, but you have to renotice that meeting. So it's another mailing. So the electronic voting can increase participation as well as hopefully eliminate that need for a second notice package to go out.
Yep, great. Excellent point. Excellent point there, Marnie. Now, it looks like we may have struck a nerve with the Kaufman language. I guess if you could give some pros and cons on the Kaufman, and then also just to bring back the governing documents and the amendments, like what have you seen of some of the big amendments or that maybe that you've done that the association has benefited from?
Sure. Okay. Kaufman it is what it is. I don't always trust the legislature, but they are what they are. We only have so much control and so much lobbying that we can do. Some associations want to do it, and there are provisions of the statute that no matter what your documents say will control the substantive portions. So term limits, things like those. Discrimination, obviously, it doesn't matter if it's in your documents, you can't do it. So, I mentioned that just in a broader sense, but, what I'm seeing really being altered right now is amendments to leasing, pets, because, developers sell documents that have no restrictions. They have no restrictions on the rentals other than zoning, and pets is you can have as many Great Danes as you want, and that's just not feasible. So those are a lot of the more daily living amendments that I'm seeing, but I'm seeing a lot of associations really look into the amendment provisions. And again, not making it so that 5 people can make changes, but making it palatable. I'm also seeing changes to material alterations. You get some of these older buildings that are large and they don't want to be, the same color 40 years later. So, it's not going crazy, but it's day-to-day changes that can help the property values. So, one question I also see in there, I'm just going to go ahead and answer is, can boards vote electronically? As an owner, yes, they can, but board members acting as board members can appear telephonically or by Zoom or in person. There's not really an electronic voting capability for boards to operate in their functions because those are open notice meetings. So I think hopefully that addressed that one question that was in there.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that. I was going to bring that up, and you bring up an excellent point, Marnie, when it comes to basically that voting portion, because many times documents you could have a pet, but it doesn't have the size of the pet, and you can put it into the rules and regulations. But here comes the next board that has that great thing that you were talking about, and says, "All right, we're going to change this rule to this," and it's a simple 30-day notice, sending it out to all the residents, and so forth. So it is important to keep that top of mind, that if you want a more of, I guess it's never permanent, but more of a permanent change or change that everyone understands that this is the way things need to be done, then you want to amend the documents themselves and not just put a rule in there. And similar to you, I guess from the management side, we have seen that topic, especially now with Airbnb and certain associations that do have condo kind of hotel, whatever. We are seeing a lot more of those amendments of associations wanting to make those amendments as well. Frank, from your side, where do you see the success in getting those increased numbers to be able to get more individuals to participate? Is it breaking down the amendments, as I stated a little bit earlier, or is it more of just the way it's proposed to the residents?
Definitely, it's breaking them down. So connect with an electronic voting provider that has maybe unlimited voting throughout the year, right? That's not obviously challenging and cost for every single amendment. Get an all-inclusive plan for 12 months, tackle everything you have to. Obviously, you want to break it down granularly, but to a certain degree, right? You don't want to have owners voting every single month or every other month on amendments. They're going to get voting fatigue and say, forget it, I'm not voting anymore. What do you need? But I've also seen the other extreme, Rafael, to your point, which is, hey, we've got an annual meeting and we vote not only on our director positions, but we vote on all of these amendments and all of these issues. That could compromise that vote as well. That could be challenging for all of these owners. While the biggest benefit out of electronic voting in the statutes back in 2015 is that an electronic vote does count towards quorum, and owners do not need to be in attendance for that meeting. So that's a huge benefit. Obviously, you don't need those proxies for attendance purposes anymore. If someone's voting electronically, it still can be challenging to make sure that, hey, it's all or none the date of the annual meeting. It's like everyone's voting or we don't have it for the rest of the year. Break it down. Certainly get with association council, break it down, make sense out of it, and again, engage the community accordingly to make sure that they understand, hey, we're only going to have 2 or 3 votes this year, and this is what we're going to tackle, and get those that information out ahead of time. Don't shock and surprise these owners by them receiving a limited proxy or them receiving a ballot and saying, I didn't even know this was coming and it was time to vote. So make sure that you've got plenty of notice, whether it's internal email blast prior to or even post, letting them know what you're trying to accomplish as well. Don't be afraid of that, right? I've seen a lot of those internal emails and even town halls post sending out those limited proxies for amendments saying, hey, we're going to have a town hall. We're going to discuss why we feel that these amendments are important. So make sure you've got an electronic voting provider that can support everything that we're saying. And then last but not least, to Marnie's point earlier, electronic voting for board members. We are seeing technology, and that includes with Get Quorum, that allows board members to log into a Zoom meeting and cast an electronic vote. It exists, it's out there. I think we're waiting for board members to catch up, and obviously all of these statutes to certainly make it more pleasable or possible. But for the most part, generally speaking, what we've got is technology that does support electronic votes for both board members and owners, and it exists, it's out there.
Now, for with regards, Frank, like the transparency of it, I have a question here from Edwin, and he asked, does the software provide like data that says emails delivered, kind of like a Constant Contact or any of these other providers? Does it give you that kind of data where, okay, these emails were not good, and maybe management or the committee can go somewhat, I don't want to use the word attack mode, but more of really trying to get that data that's necessary? What kind of information does the system provide? Excuse me.
Sure, definitely. Great question, first of all, and Edwin. And by the way, what you want to do is make sure that you do have that data on your side. And yes, the system does provide a ton of tracking capabilities, the likes of which you can never get by paper-based notices and ballots. You should have, number one, an electronic affidavit of mailing. If you are going to provide electronic notices, make sure that that's on your side. Very detailed information about who was sent a notice, the date it was sent, the time it was sent. And again, email bounce backs, to your point, should always be available, whether that's in the beginning of the process when that consent form kind of gets sent out, or even all the way through some sort of proxy or ballot. You want to know as a provider, electronic provider, and then as a manager, if there's any email bouncing back, or you want to have the information on your end as to when an owner has received the notice. It's going to be challenged. There's no doubt about it. An owner will call management and say, you did not send me my annual meeting notice or my budget notice or my special meeting notice. See everybody, with smiles there. And I want you to give me the confirmation on your end of when you sent this and how you did it and where it took place. It is available, 100% available, absolutely, on our end. And again, if you're working with a platform that doesn't have that information, buyer beware, run away, because that is important information. Again, very detailed, and even much more so than we get with a normal traditional snail mail mailing, where it's just we put it in the mailbox or we gave it to the post office. We don't know the journey after that. We don't know what happened to it.
Sure, excellent. And Marnie, with regards to the amendments, like what are the basic procedures to be able to amend the documents? I think there's different requirements for HOAs and condos. Like people get confused many times with what are the quorum of members, a quorum for an annual meeting. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that will be document driven. There are provisions in the statute that discuss quorum, and it's different for condos and HOAs. But elections are different. In a condominium, regardless of what your quorum is, if you have 20% of your owners casting ballots, you can hold the election. Obviously, that's different with amendments. Amendments goes back to your documents, how it's driven. You have to have quorum participating, and then you have to achieve the numbers that are required by the documents. In an HOA, your quorum is 30%. Unless you have adopted the condominium style voting for your election, you're going to have to attain that quorum, whether it be in person or by proxy. And then you can have nominations from the floor, which makes electronic voting a bit different, because in a traditional condo, the ballot goes out, it gets sent back, and it's a static ballot for candidates who put their names in. In an HOA, you can take those nominations from the floor, and that's something Get Quorum has, is they have the capability to have a live ballot. So if you're voting electronically, they take those nominations from the floor, they stick them on the ballot, and then people can still vote in real time. And again, HOAs, the elections, you typically have a lot of homes. It's difficult to get quorum. It's difficult to get participation. It's also very time consuming because
Very.
as you're signing in all of these owners, you've got to verify that they're correct and bring their information in, hand them out a hand them out a ballot, wait for the nominations from the floor, have them fill it out with 85 different forms of handwriting and orders. So
Mhm.
when you go to collect those ballots and count them, it's a far more time consuming process. That's one area where the electronic voting, it can make it very easy, especially if you have that live ballot on the HOA side, because it makes that tabulation very fast. It's a very enjoyable meeting for management council, the candidates and so forth. And it's a very structured program in that, in order to register, whether you're in an HOA or a condo, you're working with management. Management is going to have the roster. They're going to have for corporate units or otherwise, depending on how your documents are written, who's actually able to vote for the unit. That individual is going to be the one signing off on the opt-in. They're going to provide the correct information to management. That information is then provided to the provider for online voting. And that's going to be the individual that's going to have the authority to create that account and that login and that password. And that way you have that next level of sureness and safety as to what your process looks like to avoid, maybe fraud or, people trying to harvest votes or treat electronic voting like a traditional, general proxy. It's not. It's a much more controlled environment, and it's also quicker. The only thing I would say is, when you're looking at your community to determine whether you want to do this, I have a couple communities of over 55, and when I say over 55, they're about 90 is the average age. They don't want electronic voting because for them, their membership meetings, their annual meetings, it's an event. And that's great. And typically, that's not the group that would have maybe the technological capabilities. So it's a pretty easy, pass on online voting for them. But far more of these communities, whether it be international or out of state or young or tiny and are, even eco-conscious, they want this capability. And it actually is very controlled and safe. And from a legal standpoint, I have yet to see in my personal experience with it, really any issues of fraud. And I think that the whole process itself is very trusted, and it's very trusted by the membership, by the seated board and management. So it makes for a very easy process, whether it be elections or other votes.
Yeah, excellent points. And you mentioned with the HOAs, especially in the larger HOAs, because we do manage some very large HOAs, 2,500, 3,000 plus units. If they don't have a system, it is very challenging. I mean, it's an all hands on deck event for us. I mean, we're checking Miami-Dade. If it's in Miami-Dade, cross-referencing all the information, team from corporate, team that are on site. So that's why it's very important for us as well to try to promote electronic voting as much as possible, because it does make our lives easier. First year, it's a process like anything else, but it becomes easier. As Frank mentioned, you get more individuals on it. And once you have the data, it's much easier to be able to communicate, because as new owner come in, you're already capturing new emails. You're capturing the information that's necessary to start pushing that. And then if you have a good process within the way you manage things, then you should already be advising the new owner within their welcome letter, well, welcome to the community. This is what we do. Online voting, you should go through this process and get all that kicked off earlier on, so that as the year progresses and you get to that either special assessment vote, governing documents change, budget, whatever the change is that's needed for the vote, it makes your life much easier. I do want to throw this question at you, Frank. Veronica asked an amazing question. I know Marnie was saying how safe it is. How do you make sure that the emails registered corresponds to the actual owner? Veronica asked that question.
Yeah, definitely. And Marnie touched on it and started kind of the answer there. So very good question. Thank you, Veronica, for that. It starts really with a collection of internal data from the management company, right? Information of said owner, email address corresponding to that owner. Obviously, some sort of mailing address, so they do have a separate address, so they don't live in that community. And having kind of that roster intake for us. What kind of follows that is, again, an official really compliance consent form, whereby we're now asking that owner to consent to electronic voting. And in that consent, if you really break it down, what we're doing is asking them to confirm, number one, that they're opting into electronic voting. But in addition to that, to state that the email address on that consent form is in fact their email address, and they are authorized to receive emails there, and they are the person that they're stating that they are, right? So they're basically filling out an electronic legally binding agreement, a consent agreement, whereby again they're confirming that that is their identity on our platform. Second to us even getting that information from management. But what happens after that is every single time there's a proxy or a ballot filled out on our platform, we're going to reconfirm ownership information. We're going to ask them to reconfirm that they in fact are entering the platform, and even before they do that, that they are who they say they are, right? So this is Frank Valdez. The information has been sent to me encrypted already. There's encryption behind it, and obviously security behind that, but I am reconfirming and reaffirming that that's me. And I will tell you, having received a ballot in a mailbox, everything I just stated hopefully is a lot more secure than putting things in a mailbox and hoping that they got back. Unless you have a forensic signature person from CSI Miami on your staff, you probably don't know what advanced ballots are coming in and where they're from and who filled them out, which has been a big challenge as well.
I laugh because you're completely right on that. Many times when we've had those associations that don't have the electronic voting, we're asked the question, so how are you validating the signature? And it doesn't happen. We're not CSI investigators. We're just cross-references the information that's provided, and no different goes with the emails. And ultimately, I think that there is some responsibility as well on the owners as well. If you're going through this process, okay, what's the email that you have on file? Because owners do have responsibility. Many times it's pushed on the board and on management. And the truth of the matter is that you have a responsibility of updating your mailing address. You have a responsibility of updating your information, because the clearer the information, the less challenges you'll have in the future. It's not just electronic voting. It's communication for violations. It's communication for your late notices and fines and so forth. So owners do have a certain responsibility. But what we could do as management is just, maybe quarterly or every 6 months, just send an update if you want to update your contact information. And that's why we have that on our association's websites and on our Affinity website. I do have a question here from George, and he asks, in the case of a voting challenge, how is the validity of each vote determined? It would appear that there is no way to preserve confidentiality in the case of it being challenged.
They will stay confidential in our world. If it's a secret ballot, because again, there's all sorts of votes here, folks, right? We've got the limited proxies for amendments, which generally speaking are not secret at all. We can tell how Frank voted or how Marnie voted and what date and what time. But when we're talking about secret ballots specifically, it's a very similar process to the paper sort of voting, whereby you're going to have a report stating who voted electronically, right? So we're going to have confirmation that said person voted electronically, that they're confirmed electronic vote in the platform, that they've already obviously authorized themselves to vote electronically. So that's kind of box check there. And then separate to that, a report of the electronic final results. And no, it doesn't tie the owner to obviously the result and the way they voted specifically. So that's a good point. But neither does paper results as well right now, right? You've got the outer envelope, the inner envelope. The outer envelope's confirmed voter. Yes, we know who they are. We're good. And then the ballots go into a box and you've got a list. You can never tie back, to my understanding anyways, you can never tie back, well, we got a ballot for a yes for Marnie, and that was casted by Frank from unit 101. The same thing for electronic voting. We're going to keep it secret. We're going to make sure that there's obviously a ton of security behind it. And we're going to have 2 reports, one for the electronic voting to know who voted electronically, to ensure that person hasn't also casted a paper ballot. And then, of course, a separate report with the official results. I'll leave it with this, which is usually kind of the satisfier here, the pacifier, I should call it, for all the owners on the call today. Our system and many platforms should, according to the statutes, send out an electronic receipt of the transaction in the platform. If you're working with an electronic voting provider in the state of Florida that is not providing that, again, stay away from that, because the statutes are very clear. The electronic voting platform must submit a receipt to the owner that has voted in that platform. That receipt must be detailed. It's not, hey, you voted, here's your sticker, have a nice day. It's actually detailed information stating how they voted, who they voted for, and then, of course, confirmation details behind that for them to keep for their eyes only and their records, obviously. That's, to me, the final affirmation and confirmation that I need, because I can go to Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, wherever you guys like, with a few owners and sit down and say, like, hey, how the heck did we all vote for, Rafael, but Marnie, got voted in? Like, there's some playing here with the system, right? So once the system kicks out that confirmation email, It's obviously very intentional. They did that on purpose in the statutes as you read through them. They made sure that, it's very hard to cheat the system when you're sending a receipt, a detailed receipt to each individual owner that voted in the platform.
Mhm.
Yep, it's a direction that we're moving, it's the data, right? And I mean, that's,
Yeah.
HOAs are no different than condos. I mean, now we have with, HB 1203, then now HOAs with 100 units or more are going to be required to have a website by, 2025. So it's a direction that it's taken. And in my opinion, being in the industry as long as I have and all of you have, I know you'd agree with me. It's just the more transparency you have, the easier it is to manage. There's enough challenges in managing condos and HOAs of having to deal with the people. So whatever you could drive through systems and processes, I know we're big proponents of it. We do our best. Many times we get beat up with the older communities. Everything is digital, but the reality is that we want to be able to provide that information back to the residents if they're asking for it. And Marnie, I guess just to kind of wrap up here with regards sticking to that, I guess challenging where owners may challenge an election. Where do you see that normally occurring, and how long should those records be held if the association does have, let's say, the digital ballots? I'm sure it's forever, they can keep it, but more the paper ballots. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the laws changed a little bit recently. It used to be that you kept all the ballots for a year. Now there's kind of some catch-all language about keeping it perpetually. Same thing with your electronic records as your paper records. You can hold on to them. One thing, that Frank was talking about, how you can maintain anonymity. On the converse, if you're taking an open vote with limited proxies, you can actually not just see the results, but see who voted. And that way you know who to target or who has already participated if you don't, for some reason, achieve those numbers. But in Rafael, you hit the nail on the head. HOAs are looking more and more like condos, and it's a trend that's going to continue. When I first started practicing, HOAs were kind of the Wild West, because anything goes, and it was, you saw long-standing boards because quorums could never be achieved, and you're starting to see homeowners. And again, like I said in the very beginning, most development is going to be controlled in some way, shape, or fashion under a condo or an HOA regime. So the more proponents of controls and communications and transparency and participation, I think, can avoid a lot of the suggestions of fraud or control or overreaching. And so what you want to do as a board is, consider electronic voting, be very transparent with your membership. That's going to keep that flow of communication moving forward. And I think it can be very helpful to avoid a lot of the claims, because, we only hear about the bad seeds in the news, what's going on with boards and the corruption. The vast majority of communities are doing it right. And they're getting counsel and they're using good management. And so what we have to do is we have to promote that. So I think that transparency, even if it goes outside a board's comfort zone of maybe moving forward and taking this on, don't be so concerned about, potentially losing control of the board. Think about what you're presenting to your membership and how open and transparent you're being. And I think that serves you far more than the alternative.
Excellent. Great. I love that response. And you're completely right with regards to most associations. The high majority are doing what's right. They're following business judgment rule. They're doing what needs to do. It's just, we have the unfortunate small percentage that do exist. And sometimes it is what it is. It happens in every industry. It's just not this industry, but not just this industry, but it's what we have to deal with. But I think that's the purpose of these webinars, is really to educate, provide knowledge, understanding of how to deal with these challenges and how to get through them. So in order to wrap up, I guess I'll give each of you an opportunity to provide a golden nugget and how they can reach you. So I'll start off with you, Frank.
Yeah, definitely. Frank Valdez at getquorum.com. Frank Valdez at getquorum.com. If not, go to getquorum.com and fill out the contact us feature, and be happy to assist everybody on this call. Even if you have some further questions you want to discuss specific to your community, reach out, please.
Thank you very much, Frank, again for being on with us. Marnie?
Of course, it's Marnie Reagan. I'm with Haber Law. So it's mreagan@haber.law. Happy to help you guys out anytime, whether you're a client or not. It's not always about trying to get business. That doesn't hurt, but it is what it is. What I would tell all of you, feel free to reach out to me. If you have questions, do so. It's always easier to avoid problems if you get the answers before you get in there. It's so much easier to solve it before it snowballs. So, don't ever hesitate to contact your professionals, whether it be management, counsel, accounting, your online, anything like that, because it's an ounce of prevention.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Marnie, for being with us. I guess my golden nugget really has to do with just continuing to push the level of transparency within our associations. I think this webinar really shows the ability that electronic voting and making changes within your documents allow. I know those residents that are trying to get their board members to accept it. It's really taking the approach of that positive approach, communicating to the residents of its importance, and also taking the ability to maybe take a lead within that board of directors, because these changes do positively impact our associations. With regards to me, if you want any questions or suggestions that you may need from the management side, you can reach to us directly at info@managedbyaffinity.com, or you can visit our website, managedbyaffinity.com. Also, I highly recommend everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Managed by Affinity, and we'll have this video up within the next 24 hours. Thank you all for being here with us, for both the residents, as well as the board members, as well as the managers that are on the call. Thank you for taking a step into learning a little bit more and getting the leadership skills that are necessary to be a stronger leader within your community association. Thank you all, and I wish you a wonderful week.
Have a good week.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Enjoy.